Hi everybody, I'm Davin and I work at the Pleasant Branch. I'm a big music fan and I'm here today to talk to you about 10 great albums in Hoopla that you have not heard. Now, if you haven't checked out Hoopla yet, it's an online resource brought to you by the library. You can use it to check out ebooks, audiobooks, movies, TV shows, comic books, and of course music. So, after this is over, you're going to want to head over to hoopladigital.com or download the Hoopla app to your smartphone. Get signed up with your email address and library card and get started. Alright, our first album today, we're going all the way back to 1957 with Louie Armstrong meets Oscar Peterson. Of course, everybody knows Louie Armstrong, probably the most famous jazz musician and trumpet player of all time, but I think also a very underrated and expressive singer. And that's what you get on this album, a lot of Louie singing. He was actually a little self-conscious about his voice, which is why it's rare to get an album like this where he sings all the way through. But luckily we have this one where he works through a lot of jazz standards. Of course, he's accompanied on this by the great pianist Oscar Peterson. This is a really good one to put on while you're making dinner at the end of the day. If you like great jazz singing, you'll love this one. Incidentally, I discovered this album through this book, The Great Jazz and Pop Vocal Albums, which you can check out from our White River branch. So I highly recommend you take a look at this book as well. Find a whole bunch more great albums. Alright, now let's jump ahead a few years to the 1960s with Motown, the complete number ones. You've heard these songs before, but you've never heard them all in one place. This set collects every number one hit that ever came out on Motown Records. That's 208 songs, that's 13 hours of music. You're going to hear Smokey Robinson and the Miracles, The Temptations, The Supremes, The Four Tops, Marvin Gaye, Stevie Wonder, The Jackson 5, the list goes on and on. This even goes into their hits from the 80s and 90s with acts like Lionel Richie and Boyz II Men. You can put this on when you get up in the morning and you'll have amazing music to listen to all day long. Spend a little time with this one and you'll have no doubt that Motown was one of the greatest record labels of all time. Okay, now we're headed south from Detroit to Mississippi with another big box set. This one is dedicated to just one artist, the great Bobbie Gentry with The Girl from Chickasaw County. Most people know Bobbie Gentry for her huge number one hit Ode to Billie Joe from 1967. That's included here on her first album. As well as the other 6 albums she put out, including a great duets album with Glenn Campbell from 1968. If you like 1960s country, you owe it to yourself to check out Bobbie Gentry. She was one of the first female artists to compose and produce her own music. She made her mark and then walked away from the music business. She's still alive and well, but hasn't recorded, performed, or even been interviewed since 1982. Alright, now let's fly over to England and get in some rock and roll with the Rolling Stones Rock and Roll Circus. This is the soundtrack to a TV special that the Stones filmed in 1968 while they were taking a break from recording this album, Let It Bleed, and they roped a bunch of their friends from the London music scene in as well. So not only do you get a performance by the Stones, you also get groups like The Who and Jethro Tull, and a one-time only performance by a supergroup consisting of John Lennon and Yoko Ono, Eric Clapton, Keith Richards, and Mitch Mitchell from the Jimi Hendrix Experience. Now, this was filmed in 1968, but wasn't actually released until 1996, supposedly because The Who blew the Stones off the stage. And indeed, that performance by The Who is one of the most amazing things you'll ever see. Seriously, once you're done watching this video, go up in that search bar and type The Who Rock and Roll Circus. You will not regret it. Alright, let's move on to 1969, still in England. This is Legion Leaf, the 4th album from an English folk rock band called Fairport Convention. Now, if you're mostly familiar with American folk rock bands like the Byrds, this is a very different sounding record. What they're doing on this album is taking traditional British folk ballads and playing them with 60s rock arrangements. Now, Fairport were a big influence on a lot of British bands from the 60s and 70s, including Led Zeppelin. In fact, Sandy Denny from Fairport, who sings on this album, is the guest singer on the Battle of Evermore on Led Zeppelin 4. So if you like that song, you definitely want to check out this album. Okay, moving on to 1970, back over to America, specifically Memphis, Tennessee, even more specifically to the famous McLemore Avenue, which is the name of this record by Booker T and the MGs. Booker T and the MGs were, of course, the in-house band at the legendary Stax Records, and they played on hundreds of classic records by artists like Otis Redding and Sam and Dave, so many more. They also made amazing instrumental records themselves. They're probably best known for their hit song Green Onions. They put out McLemore Avenue in 1970, and you can tell from the cover it's their tribute to the Beatles. There's actually a Stax Beatles connection. The Beatles were such huge fans of Stax Records that they almost recorded an album at the studio in the 1960s. Didn't happen, so this is the next best thing. This is an all-instrumental album of Beatles covers, played in a very fun and funky Memphis style, and I'd recommend it highly to any fan of Stax or the Beatles. Now we're jumping ahead to 1974 and another R&B classic. This is Perfect Angel by Minnie Riperton. This record has a pretty cool backstory. She had put out her first album in 1970. It was not very successful, so she moved down to Florida and was in semi-retirement, raising her family, when an intern at a record label tracked her down and convinced her to come to Los Angeles to record a new album. They got Stevie Wonder to produce it, even though he had to do it under a fake name because he was under contract to Motown at the time. This record was a huge smash, and it had a famous #1 hit called Loving You, which really showcases that 5-octave range that she's famous for. The whole album is very fun, laid-back R&B record that's perfect for any summer cookout. Our next album came out just 1 month later in September 1974. It's the first solo album from Ronnie Wood, and it's called, appropriately, I've Got My Own Album to Do. Now Ronnie Wood is one of the greatest sidemen in rock and roll. He's probably best known for being the second guitarist in the Rolling Stones since 1975. But before that he played with Jeff Beck, Rod Stewart, The Faces, and many others. And since he's such a well-connected guy, this record has a lot of his famous friends on it, including Mick Jagger and Keith Richards, George Harrison, Rod Stewart, David Bowie. It's got a real fun, laid-back vibe to it, like he just got a bunch of buddies together and they banged out this album over a long weekend. So if you're a Stones fan, you're definitely going to want to check this one out. Alright, our next to last album is from 1977. It's the legendary Rumours by Fleetwood Mac. And I know what you're thinking, this is supposed to be the best albums you've never heard, and of course everyone has heard Rumours. True, but you probably haven't heard this super deluxe version, which has over 4 hours of music. So not only do you get the original album, you get a complete live show from the Rumours tour. Most importantly, you get several hours of studio outtakes from the making of the album. Sort of like a behind-the-scenes audio documentary of how they made the record. You get demos and early run-throughs of the songs, and it's just a really interesting way to hear how the album came together. Alright, our very last album takes us up to 1984, and that's Purple Rain by Prince. Much like Rumours, you've probably heard this album, or at least its big hits like When Doves Cry, Let's Go Crazy, and of course the title track, Purple Rain. But Prince was such a genius and he worked so fast and so much that he was literally writing and recording songs faster than he could put them out. As a result, for every album he put out in the 80s, there's another album or two worth of material that's just as good or even better that was never released. So what you get on this deluxe reissue is not just the original Purple Rain album, but an hour's worth of outtakes from that time period. That's complete recorded songs, didn't make the cut at the time. Some of them were reworked later for other albums or other artists. Some just sat in the vault for all those decades. So what I would recommend you do is check out this great book from Alan Light on the making of the album and the movie. Check out the movie Purple Rain and have yourself a Prince-filled weekend. Hey, that's it. I hope you enjoyed it. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you again next time.